This is the Creative Endeavor Podcast, bringing you inspiring stories from creative professionals from around the world. It's real conversations with real artists, and I'm Andrew Tischler, and what a pleasure it is to have your company here once again. Welcome to the studio. In this episode, I'm talking to Michelle Dunaway, someone that I've been following for some years and have been really inspired by. Her work is so fresh and vibrant. Her brushwork is exquisite. She creates portraits and figurative works, as well as some landscape and plein air, that is just bursting with color and real heartfelt emotion. I think when an artist is all in, really dialed into their craft, and feels something and connects with their subject, it comes through. And it moves the viewer. I wanted to ask Michelle all about her work and how she does that. What are some of the things that she's thinking about when she paints? But also to hear a little bit about the business side of art as well and how her creative journey started. And we even got into some of the things that she's looking forward to, anticipating today, and some of the challenges that might be coming up for artists working in 2023 and beyond. This was fantastic to have an opportunity to connect with Michelle, to get to know her a little better. Man, I'm even more inspired now after this conversation. Now, right now, follow her on Instagram. She can be found at Dunaway Fine Art and on her website at www.dunawayfineart.com. Go and follow her amazing work there. And I know you're going to be just as blown away as I am. Now, I've also included in the show notes some links to some really cool stuff that Michelle has on the horizon, like some really incredible looking art tours in Africa, of all places. How awesome would it be to be out there in the African wilderness, observing magnificent creatures and then painting them alongside someone like Michelle? That sounds pretty cool. So I'll include some links there so you can check that out. Now I'm going to get out of the way, let Michelle take over. Without further ado, here she is, Michelle Dunaway in the Creative Endeavor. Michelle Dunaway, what a pleasure to welcome you to the Creative Endeavor Podcast. How are you?
Oh, wonderful to be here. Very excited to have a conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, look, let's kick things off. I'm dying to hear more about your story, how your art journey began. Where did this all start for you?
I can't remember a time that I wasn't fascinated with just life, people's faces, scenery from a young age. So about two or three, from my first memory is seeing an art book, and I was drawing before I could talk. So it was just kind of, I don't know if it's something that came with me into this world or just something that just arrested me, the beauty of nature. I grew up in Alaska, so it's just, I know you're in New Zealand, just epic landscapes, beautiful scenery. And I was just always fascinated by people. My mom said when I was a little baby in the playpen, when people would come over to visit, I would just unnerve them because I would stare at them, stare at their faces, stare at their hand movements. And as soon as I could hold a pencil, I was drawing eyes and hands.
Wow. Wow. I think kids have it, don't they? Children are born with something. It's one of my favorite Picasso quotes. I'm going to butcher it, but Picasso said that every child is an artist. The trouble is remaining an artist as one grows up. Something like that. If I can find it, I'll
Yeah,
put it on the screen. But it's so true, right? Kids are just
I
naturally inquisitive and creative.
exactly. I totally agree with it because I think one of the fundamental aspects of being an artist is being creatively curious. And I think all children are very creatively curious about everything. And I don't know when that gets kind of pulled out of us. For some, it never does. I teach a lot, as I know you do as well. And so I'll have students in my class that have, been away from their art for 20 or 30 years, and then they come back, and it's really about igniting that curiosity, that wonderment. from childhood, and then implementing it with all the skills and adult knowledge you have or have
Mm.
gleaned as a painter to create your vision. But that is such an essential element. So I think everyone is creative in some way, whether they're an artist or not. And it's part of our goal to, like, find an outlet for that and share that with the world, because it just kind of is a ripple effect.
Do you ever get that from some people when you're like talking to them about art? Random question, I know, it just popped into my head, but you'd
That's
be
okay. I
talking
love
to some,
random questions.
you'd be talking to somebody and it'd be like, they'll say, I know nothing about art. I know nothing about that statement from people. Just, you know, it kind of bugs me because I think that everybody's got it. It's just, I just,
You.
for one way or another, we've learned not to. I don't know, that creativity just seems to be leached away from us the older we get. And there's a fortunate few of us that manage to hold on to it until later years. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Does that make sense? I probably worded that
Oh,
a little
no,
bit poorly,
completely.
but
Because I think sometimes when people say that, there's a couple things going on. Is one, maybe they're not in touch with themselves, their own inclinations, their own sensitivities as a human being. Because again, I think we're all creative, we're all artistic in some way. It may be painting, it may be parenting, it may be gardening, it could be photography, music, anything. But the urge to create is something that's just inborn in us as human beings. And I've always believed that that's what it means to be made in the image of God. I'm a Christian. And so to me, that doesn't mean a physical appearance. It means God is a creator and we are
yeah,
creators.
yeah, I
And
love that.
so I think sometimes people lose touch with themselves,
Mm.
and it's the old adage, know thyself. Also, I think sometimes when people see like professional art, however you define that, they might get caught up in the intellectualism of that, thinking like, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know the parameters. Where all the professional artists I know that I respect and admire, they're just immersed in that same wonder they had as a child. And then they're
Mm.
creating with their adult skills. And so it's just one of my favorite quotes. I love quotes, writing down all the time, have like a book of different people's quotes. But one of my favorite is by Baudelaire: genius is childhood recovered at will.
Wow. Repeat that for me. I love that.
That's one of my favorites. Genius is childhood recovered at will.
I
And
love
that
that.
that hangs in my studio and has for over a decade, because back when I was merging into hopefully being a professional artist and working part-time, and I was actually a preschool teacher during the day and then would paint at night and teach painting at night at a local art school. What fascinated me being a preschool teacher was seeing, and I worked from ages 2 to like 7 years old at this private elementary school. And every time the kids came out on the playground, they might have been there a million times before. Everything was new. Everything was new each day. And I felt at like 22, 23, when I was doing that, it really taught me so much about art, life, philosophy, that's how we need to approach life.
Mhm.
And just see, everything is new. We've never experienced this moment. We've never experienced this sunset. This is our first conversation, but even if we'd had hundreds of conversations, this would be unique in and of itself. And so when we see life that way, I think a natural outpouring is artistic expression. How can it not be?
Wow. Yeah, that's so awesome. Yeah, that really I'm moved by that quote, I must say. I'm gonna write that down. Maybe that's a keeper. It's something I'll hang in my studio too, because that's just incredible. You mentioned a couple of things there, and I'd really love to dive deeper into the professional journey. So this
Yeah.
started out, so you went down a road of teaching, education, preschool teaching. So how did that professional journey emerge and unfold for you? Take us back to the beginning of that and those little wins
Yeah.
that you got to end up where you are today.
Okay. Yeah, and I wasn't like a professional teacher. I did not have a degree in education. I was basically the person, I was 22. I was basically the person that gave the teachers breaks. So I took the kids to give them a break. But it was a wonderful time. I had went to art school uh pretty young, to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, at right out of high school, as one of the youngest people there. I really wanted to go into illustration. And at that time, I thought I want to illustrate books. I want to do, that was what I associated with art. I wasn't aware at 17, 18 years old that there was a whole fine art realm of doing fine art paintings. So I went to school for illustration, went for a couple years through that, came back home on a break just to save some money. I was maybe about 20 years old, and then was doing some sculpture. I got into doing some sculpture in New Mexico and got a sculpture commission on the East Coast. And I submitted a bid for this sculpture commission. It was like a small statue, and then went and got a book on the library how to do sculptures, because like I didn't know all the technical stuff. I had the vision. I sculpted a lot, and for about a year from live models. And then I was out in New York on the East Coast, and I lived out there for about 7 or 8 months as I did this sculpture for company. And I went to the Metropolitan Museum for the first time. And when I walked in the American Wing, I was just blown away. It was a life-changing moment. I felt like I was home. Like, that feeling when you leave home for the first time to go away to college, and then you come back for the first visit and you're in your mother's kitchen or something and she's cooking and you're like, oh, I'm home.
Hmm.
I had that feeling, but it was with all of these paintings and painters that were new to me, Sargent, Cecilia Beau, all of it. It was
Wow.
just seeing brushwork for the first time, seeing fine art painting. I mean, I had been exposed to other painting when I was younger, like Monet, and I know that's a first love for many artists, and the color and the light. But seeing, these representational paintings, I just knew right then that that was what I was going to spend my life doing. I just didn't know it was an option to paint like that. Um, and yeah, so I mean, when I was a preschool teacher, it was back when I was um, had taken a break from art school, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. The illustration world had changed. It was going to computer technology. All of a sudden, what I had aspired to do wasn't really like an option to do, like hand-drawn stuff. And he was like, well, what do I want to do? And I remember I started drawing the children at recess. I just started sketching them, and then parents started commissioning drawings, and then I went to New York and saw the paintings, and then I realized, like, oh, you can do this. And I met other artists that were pivotal in my career. Morgan Weisling. I met Jeremy Lipkin when he did, it was like, I think before his first show, his very first workshop. And another artist my age that was doing around my age that was doing um, representational work. And it's like, oh, this is a career you can do.
Wow.
And it's what I had done from before I could remember. I just would doodle people's faces and hands, and that I could do that for a living. Just the idea just blew my mind.
Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean, when you actually think about it, I get to paint pictures. When is this going to end? Wake me up.
I know. And to me, it's just such a natural expression of paying attention to life and being
Yeah.
so enamored and enchanted with what you see before your eyes.
Hmm.
I mean, like I mentioned before, people have always fascinated me, especially like their little mannerisms, the way they move their hands, the way if they're telling a story, a myriad of emotions passes over their eyes without them even realizing it. And
Hmm.
those moments to me are so beautiful, moments of vulnerability, strength, um, just all those subtle human emotions have always captivated me from the time I was a child. It's
Hmm.
just always very intuitive with, talking to people. I love hearing about people's stories and implementing that into my paintings. So I'm just so thankful that I can do that for a living.
That's awesome. There's so much there I want to go into. But let me just ask you on that. You
Yeah.
remind me kind of a little bit of my process, especially when I'm painting a portrait and I'm gathering photo reference. You talk about like a little look or a little moment, or where the story is revealed, the characters there. I go through my file, some of my references, like there are hundreds of photos from just one shoot, one person, one lighting setup, and I just be going through, and then bang, that's it. That's the moment where they were on, and the character is fully there and the story is revealed. I don't know. Do you find something similar?
Oh, definitely. And
Yeah.
I'll do that with my photo reference if I do a photo session. But anytime I'm in a conversation, I mean, I can't think of a time I didn't experience this where it's like
Mm.
anytime I'm having a conversation with someone, I see a moment that I see that's a painting. And it's usually a moment of reflection, vulnerability, because I think vulnerability is beautiful. It's something we usually try to hide. And it's, to me, the most beautiful moments when someone allows you to see that. It's kind of sacred. And moments of, overcoming obstacles, strength, resolve, those little subtle things that make us like quintessentially human, right? And unite us as people. I always notice that in a conversation. I'm like, oh, there's the painting. And then I might at a later time ask them, can I paint you? And try to reconstruct that moment. Try
Mm.
to bring them into that moment again so that I can capture it in paint or in a photograph. And I think too, when you do, because I'm a real advocate for painting from life, but I also love to paint from photographs as well, because there are things that I want to paint that I can't paint from life. And people in transitory moments and stuff. Um, but I'll have that same thing where you shoot hundreds, if not thousands of pictures, and all of a sudden you're like, there's that moment.
Mm.
There's that thing that I saw from life that captured something. You know, it's almost, I think, too, like a metaphor to a landscape is you could be looking at a landscape and then a little bit of light kind of cascades across the surface of the form and it just like catches your breath. And that's the thing. And they're fleeting moments, but that's what makes them so beautifully
Yeah.
exquisite and rare and, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you're speaking my language, Michelle. This is awesome.
I
And
know
you
we'll have to
mentioned
talk shop too, because I'm a total art geek. I love technique and
we're going to. We're going to. Trust me. We go every which way in the podcast. But let me ask you this. Because you mentioned something there about the those subtle little emotions, like it's the most subtle of subtle.
Mhm.
You feel it. You can hardly put it into words. These moments of reflection, that vulnerability, as you mentioned. And to me, that just highlights the importance again for that human touch. And we're living in a day and age now where we've got artificial intelligence creating pictures, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
artists losing their hats over this, and to be honest, losing their jobs too, because there are
Mhm.
some companies that are going, well, why would I get somebody to design this logo or design this graphic or do this
Yeah.
for me when I can just delegate that to a machine and ChatGPT and Midjourney will do it instantly. But you highlighted something there where I'm like, you know what? There's still a need for artists here. And maybe I'm just going, no, and shaking my fist angrily
No,
at
there
the
definitely is.
technology. But I really feel that that's absolutely needed, especially now more than ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think technology is a great tool, right? I know some
Mm.
artists don't paint from photographs. I think, photography, Photoshop, all of that. I mean, if Da Vinci and Michelangelo were alive, they would be experts on
Mm.
all this stuff, I think,
Mhm.
but utilize it not as a replacement for their artistic vision or sensitivities, but use it as a tool.
Mm.
As soon as it goes from being a tool to relying on it, that's when you cheat yourself as an artist and you're not allowing your own innate genius to come out, and I believe everyone has that. So I think like with artificial intelligence, I mean, yeah, it's kind of amazing some of the images that they can come up with, and but I see it like a tool is neutral, right? It's like a television or Instagram or anything like that, or social media. You can use it for good, you can use it negatively. And I think we can challenge ourselves to be very conscientious and intentional with how we choose to use that.
Mhm.
I always believe even with any negative situation, something positive can always come from it. And goes back a little bit to my faith and Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So I feel like we can work things together for good if we have that intention. So, I mean, a good example is, right, we just, went through COVID, still going through it a little bit. Horrible thing, wish it hadn't happened. It's horrible that people got sick. But one of the good things I see out of it is things like this,
Mhm.
having the Zoom broadcast, Zoom education. Um, I initially did it kind of, like reluctantly because I was forced to when certain conferences went digitally, and I'm just not a computer techie person. I'm more old school. And but as I started teaching online, I know you do too, I started getting feedback from students that were overseas that said, I'm so glad you're doing this because I could never do it because I take care of a handicapped child. I take care of my elderly parents. I'm in a wheelchair. I can only use my arms. I can't travel. And so I'm like, that's something beautiful that I will always continue to do that was birthed out of something negative. So going back to the AI, and sorry, I'm like going a long answer to
No,
your
no,
question.
no. I
But
love
I
the
know
long
this is
answers.
intense, controversial subject, but I think, you know, there's not much we can do to stop it, but what we can do is use it to challenge ourselves to be even more intentional with our art, right?
I love
What
that.
can we do that AI can't do? It can't have the human sensitivity. It might be able to generate a face with a great backdrop and great costume, but can it get the emotion in the eyes? Can it get that something ephemeral, that's something we can't quite put our finger on, that is the personal artist touch
Mhm.
that goes into the painting? And I think that comes not just, it's, you know, it's not in brushes or a paint tube. It comes from observation and appreciation. You know, going back to what you were saying about, you know, noticing those little moments in someone's eyes, you know, and the reason we notice those and we have these little moments that we connect and we go, oh, that's it. It's resonating with something that's within us that connects
Yeah.
us across our uniqueness into our commonality as human beings, right? Because we're all unique. We all have different life stories. We all look different. Even identical twins kind of look a little different, but we all have different sensitivities, different backgrounds, different life stories. But that kind of undercurrent of what makes us human, of wanting to, you know, love and be loved, do something meaningful,
Mhm.
you know, have joyful moments, overcoming adversity, um, you know, solidifying our inner strength. All of those quests as human beings are the same within us, whether someone lived 1,000 years ago or lived today or live in a different continent, or, you know, that's what unites us. And so we connect to that, I think, when we're with someone. And that's one of the main reasons I love to paint portraits. That is something AI can never do. And so I think it might challenge, I think it's actually, it seems like a hindrance right now in a way. I think it's going to birth a whole new level of really competent art from artists, because artists are going to go, wait, I need to step it up. I need to be more intentional. I need to really be more thoughtful about what I'm creating to put something that's really valid and meaningful in the world. And it's going to make us
Wow.
even up our technique. So we can use that as a stepping stone, you know, to do that.
It's a call to action, isn't it? It's a call
It
to action.
is.
I've never heard it framed that way before, and I love that. And I wasn't expecting you to quite go there. I was thinking, oh, but I love that. I love that angle that you've taken there. Yeah, yeah, and
Well, and I
so
actually haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it or even talking about it. It was just when you pose the question, I
mm,
always think, you know, whenever you're met with a challenge in life, I mean, how can the human spirit rise above that and turn it into something beautiful,
yeah,
something useful, something that creates goodness, you know? And if you kind of look at any of your problems like that, then it builds you up. It's like strength training your muscles, right? It
mhm,
hurts, but it gets you somewhere. And it's the same kind of thing.
absolutely. And I think the more this comes on board, and the more it develops and people start adopting it, I think it's going to make our role, as you say, I think it's going to make it even clearer and all the
Yeah.
more important. So, yeah, at first, I must admit, I was looking at it going, what's going on? And I was really curious. And
Me too.
I've been so curious for a while to dabble with it and play with it a little bit, not for my art, but just to go, okay, what you got? What you got? And I'm
Yeah.
also thinking about making a video here with this where, it's Tisch versus AI. And now, look, I'm not. I would just say I'm not looking forward to the comment section on that video when I
Well,
when
it's
I
like,
finally
you know,
make
it's
it.
really hard to beat a computer playing chess, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
there are things that, like, if you're playing a person, you
mhm,
play, I don't know if you play chess, but I mean, I've dabbled in it. I'm
yeah,
not a, you know, but
a little
if
bit.
Yeah, same here a little bit. It's fun, but it's like it's not really about this piece and that piece and knowing all these strategies. It's playing the person, or just like poker or something. You're
That's right.
tuning into what's going on, and you know, and I think again that's just something that AI can't do.
Mm.
And yeah. And I think as artists too, it's like we always need to be pushing ourselves to grow. You know, another favorite quote by Michelangelo, and I think he was 78 or maybe 87. I can't remember, one of the two, where he said, I'm still learning. So after he did the David, after he painted the
Wow.
Sistine Chapel, I am still learning. And that's kind of like my philosophy. I want to keep growing. I want to keep learning. And anything that pops in and says, I can do what you can do, it's like, nope, you can't bring the human element or the heart, you know, and it'll just push us to rise higher.
I really think, you do recognize it, don't you, when you see it? I mean, we recognize that emotion in ourselves, and that pull towards something, and that recognition of something that's so minuscule, so subtle, so nuanced. But I really think, yeah, you do see it in other people's work too. I mean, going back to when you first
Yeah.
visited the American Wing at the New York Museum, that and I've had similar moments to that. Something else popped into my mind that I because I'm a big believer that, kind of everything happens for a reason, that there are no accidents. But I wonder, where do you think you would be, if you weren't moved in that way by things that were created by the greats? Go back to the human side of things, and stuff that was created by people and epic work, and you get to see what's actually possible. That I hear that really shaped you in some way. Do you ever think about, what if I didn't actually walk into that room?
Yeah, I mean, and the fact is, when I went to the Met, I wasn't intentionally going there to look at the paintings. I actually went to look at the armory because I was really into like illustration and swords, and I have like a sword collection and everything. Um, and then it would just happen to be the room next door, and I'm like, well, let me wander in here, and it changed my life. And you know, I'd always loved, you know, drawing people's faces, but I just didn't was not exposed to that being something that you could actually do full time. But I think, you know, I was growing up in Alaska was an incredibly magical experience. It was just, you know, it's untamed wilderness everywhere you look, you know, and that raw beauty. And it just does something. It ignites your soul in a way that's very elemental. I
Mm.
felt that going to Africa for the first time this past year as well, just that kind of really untamed beauty and animals in their natural habitat. And, you know, you're looking at areas of the earth that are unchanged, really, you know, by humans. And it's just
Wow.
powerful. And so I think I'd probably be a nature photographer, or maybe I'd be like working with animals or be a park ranger or do something like outdoors because I love being in that environment. And to me, and then, you know, later as I got older and, you know, found my faith, my personal faith as a Christian, I see the entire world, every part of the world, as a moving painting created by the master artist. It's just in slow movement, right? But it's a painting, it's a creation. And I see every person as another painting, you know.
Mm.
And it's just so yeah, I'd probably be a photographer. I also dabble in playing music. Nothing I've ever done professionally, but just something to express that gratitude, you know. Something I always say is like, eh, someone asked me to me, like, what is the purpose of a painting? I was like, oh, wow. You know, because sometimes you can get so caught up in the technical and the joy of creating it or creating a person or a landscape. And to me, I feel like a painting is a doorway and it's like a window into awareness. And um, I think on that moment when they asked me, I said, you know, well, painting is my way of saying amen, but visually, you know.
Wow.
And if we think of like, you know, the etymology of the word amen from the Hebrew to the Greek to the Latin, meaning, you know, an agreement of truth, a belief in truth of what you're seeing or what is said. Um,
Wow.
that to me is what painting is. Just saying I'm in agreement with like the beauty and the mystery of this. I'm just enchanted to be a part of it all. And I want to create these windows into this awareness to hopefully ignite that feeling in someone else,
Awesome.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. The perfect place to insert this because I've got some questions here that have been asked by my online academy students, and
Yeah, sure.
see they've been helping me with some of my interviews, and it's absolutely wonderful. And they come up with some things that I don't think to ask. But here, Trey's asked this question: how much emphasis is put on composition and subject matter? And is storytelling important with your portraiture? So we
Yeah,
covered a little bit
that's
of that, but
that's a great
yeah.
question.
Mm,
And I think, composition to me is very important. I know there are different ways to go about composition, golden mean, different methodologies. To me, it's a very intuitive process, kind of like how you described looking at a photo and saying, that's the one. I feel it and kind of compose that way. I mean, I don't pre-draw any of my paintings. Like I have a few behind me. I don't always paint alla prima, but I freehand and kind of gesture it out and try to feel the composition on the canvas before I get into the actual like, meat of the painting. And so that is important, but I also think that that's very personal. It's personal to how you're being inspired and ingesting the information around you and what you want to say in your painting, right? So, so composition, goes into, I mean, there's certain, things to like not have a tangent right at the edge of the, canvas or something that can be distracting, but basically you don't want to distract from your main vision and you want to share that vision with how you're perceiving the world with the audience. It's like, yes, it's about the subject, but it's also about your perception of the subject and you being affected by the subject. So there's all these different elements, of course, to painting. I know I'm like preaching to the choir saying that to you, but and then what was the second part of his question?
oh yeah. So the second part is is storytelling important? And because I there's so many paintings here, just looking through your website that have such a beautiful narrative quality. Particularly like
You.
let's take this painting of Stephanie behind you. What the title of that? The Falconer, or what was it?
Um, the Royal Falconer.
The
Yeah,
Royal
because I
Falconer.
kind of put her in um more period clothing, and she had trained with someone that was like had trained with royalty overseas. And when she told me that story, it seemed like a natural fit. And
Awesome.
yeah, I think storytelling is very important. Um, I do like to say that storytelling sometimes it can be if you're creating a painting and you're thinking, I need to tell a story, sometimes that can feel overwhelming. Like it doesn't have to be some giant narrative, right? To me, I think of paintings can be a poem, a short story, or a novel, right? So a quick alla prima, which is like the one I did of Richard Schmid here, that to me is more like, a poem or a short story. Maybe even a quick figure sketch could be, a poem. And this is, one is more like a novel to me because it has more elements and it's touching on more. A big multi-figurative piece can be like an epic novel. So it's just, I think narrative comes naturally when we're being intentional about what we're creating and intentional in the way of saying, you know, why do I want to paint this? Right? You don't have to be able to put it in words. For me, kind of the key is like I want to paint things that make me catch my breath, moments that make me catch my breath, make my heart beat a little faster, um, kind of like those moments in life where you feel awake, alert, really in sync with who you truly are in the world around you. Those, when we experience those moments, and I think everyone does, to me as an artist, that alerts you to that is something to paint. So with Stephanie, which I know you interviewed Stephanie, and it was great listening to that interview. She is such a gifted artist and wonderful human being. And I've known her. I met her when I think she was 16 or 17, her first portrait society.
Wow.
And yeah, just to go into it, because it pertains to the painting.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, a mutual friend said, there's this young artist. I'd like to invite her to dinner, with us. Because she really wants to meet you. And I was like, great. And we sat next to each other. And she just peppered me like constantly with the most intelligent questions that really like made me think, right? And I've been teaching for a long time. So there's like, sometimes, it amazes me that it's like, oh, that's a question I haven't been asked before. And by the end of the dinner, I told her, I want to give you a scholarship to my workshop in a couple weeks in Vermont. And she was like, you haven't seen my work. I was like, I don't need to. I know you're a fantastic painter just by the complexity and the intelligence of the questions you asked. I knew she was a great painter, and of course she is. And so that developed, into a friendship. And, I just could almost see her like a younger sister. We have so many similarities and different things, and just grateful to impart any advice to her, and she's just flying right now with her career. I'm so happy for her. And you can see one of those paintings. You showed this on the podcast it's kind of dark, but her hawk. Yeah, I bought that because I was like, I've got to own that painting. That's beautiful.
Fantastic.
So at one point I went out, and it was just right before the pandemic. I went out to visit her and paint with her in her studio. She had her hawk named Zorn, who's depicted in the painting. And so we spent several days together, and we painted from life, and I painted with her painting group, and we had someone else pose with the hawk while we painted from life. And it was just a really fun time. And I had always been, like yourself, fascinated with birds of prey. I just always have. Like my last studio in New Mexico, I had this little balcony that went out, and it was next to a cottonwood tree where there were every year eagles or great horned owls, or sorry, not eagles, hawks, red-tailed hawks or Cooper's hawks would nest there. And I'd have the little babies come and land on my balcony and peek in my studio as I was working, and they'd get used to the sound of my voice. And it was like, I could get really close to them. It was fascinating. And I always wanted to learn falconry from when I was like a teenager. And it was just something I never really had a chance to do. And so she and I had this art, friendship. And then I found out that, she did falconry and like was licensed in it. And it's a huge process and commitment. And I realized I would have never had the time to do it, but it was fascinating to be around her sister, her dad, who all had their own hawks and did hunted with all of them. And so I knew I wanted to do a painting of her because, I'd say about 8 or 9 years ago, I felt like a big shift happen in my work, in where I didn't want to just paint people, but I wanted to really paint the people that I know, that I love, that I have a relationship with. Like, I've done paintings of my parents, or, like a painting of Richard, or painting of people that friends. And sometimes those are really daunting because it's not just about a likeness. It's about something more than a likeness, right? So we kind of put those off sometimes. And when I went to Spain for the first time and went to Soroya's house and saw the paintings he did, of course, his paintings are just phenomenal.
Amazing.
But then you see the paintings of his family that he did. Those paintings, there's something deeper. Just like, a few years back when they had the Sargent and Friends exhibit at the Metropolitan. I don't know if you got a chance to see that. I think it traveled around the world.
Unfortunately, no, I didn't. Now I'm spewing. I wish I did. Wow, that
It
sounds
was just
cool.
next level to see him paint people that he had relationship with. But it is more challenging as an artist because you're going to be more hard on yourself. Like, this is not finished. I'm not happy with it yet. It's in process. It looks like her, and it's starting to capture her. But I want it to feel like she's sitting in my studio. And so I'm still, playing with it. But the thing about Stephanie, I could have her pose and take a picture of her with her hawk, or paint her with her hawk, and it could be a cool painting, right? A girl with a hawk, and she's a real falconer. But I know Stephanie, I know she has a tremendous Christian faith. So from all of the ways I could pose her, I wanted her looking up towards the light, kind of in this moment where, you connect with God, kind of like a Joan of Arc kind of feel. To have that feeling. And that was really important to me. And I wanted that to supersede the subject matter, the fantastical subject matter of the hawk or the armor, which is challenging, And so yeah, I'm still playing around with some stuff. I did paint it mostly kind of alla prima in sections, but I'll probably go back and do some glazing. Sometimes I've done that with some paintings. And but yeah, I mean, a good way to describe it, going beyond the likeness, is when I was painting the portrait of Richard Schmid, and Richard had just become a dear friend over the past, 10 years that I knew him. And of course, I had studied his book back in the day when I was a young artist and never dreamed that I would ever get a chance to paint with him or be, much less be mentored under him, much less become really close friends with him and his wife. And I knew the first time I was there spending time with him in Vermont, and he's demoing and painting, and he would paint and then he'd turn around to us and like lean back in his chair and put his hand on his cheek and go, get a little smirk and go, want to hear a funny story, and he'd launch into these really beautiful, like personal stories about his life as an artist. And I knew, I was like, I want to paint that moment. I did not have the skill I felt needed to do that painting back in 2010, but I remembered it. And we had a friendship that developed for quite a long time. And just in the couple years before he passed, you're never going to feel ready to do a painting, but I knew it was the time to do the painting. And so when I painted that, it's of course a challenge to get it to look like him. And a lot of people ask me about how do you get that something beyond a likeness, right? And to make it, because to me, that was a goal in art school, to get it to look like the person, first to get it to look human, then to get it to look like the person. But then it's like, you want it to feel like the person.
Yeah.
And you can manipulate that with edges, with color temperature, focal point, things like that. And I know we'll get into talking shop about that kind of stuff later, but and it's just manipulating little shapes and getting little characteristics that are them, their little mannerisms, how they tilt their head, how they express themselves, how they, lilt their eyebrow if, they're saying something. And so I remember painting this in my studio, and it got to the point where it looked like him, but it wasn't there yet. But it looked just like him. And that took, hours and days, and then took a break, came back, and then I was just pushing and pulling shapes around for little bits, just little sensitivities, right? Little manipulations. And all of a sudden I started to tear up because I missed him, because he's almost like, we had such a close relationship, almost like an uncle or second dad kind of thing, to, as such a mentor relationship. I teared up because I hadn't seen him in a while. I'm like, that's it. That's when, you get it, because you get the emotional response from it. And yeah, so
It's a beautiful painting, Michelle. Yeah. Unfortunately, I never had the chance to meet him, but I've admired his work for years. And his book, a buddy of mine, Mike, owns his book, and I threatened to steal it from him at several occasions because it's just so good. It's so good. Well, I do want to get into the shop talk, absolutely, but I've got another zinger here to ask you from
yeah, sure.
Duncan from the Academy. And so, and you describe it there a little bit. So maybe we've already addressed this, but how do you achieve that sense of life and emotion in your paintings that goes beyond the simple likeness? And I like what you said there about, you keep playing with it. You keep just working that surface and just pulling out the shapes and manipulating subtly and just move by move by move, and then boom. I that moment, I know that moment so well. And I've said to Rachel, my wife, so many times, when I've been painting a portrait, well, when I say so many times, I'll check myself. When it works, when it works, I'll say, they've arrived. They're here. It's happened a couple of times where I've just been so excited because there's something in the eye. There's something that, it starts off looking kind of clunky, and, you start off with the sticks, and then you put flesh on the sticks, and then you end up, building this thing out until eventually, oh, wow. Okay. Um, but it's quite a spooky moment, a special moment, but yeah, I feel blessed to know exactly what you're talking about, though. Yeah, it's awesome.
And I think part of, kind of venturing into, like, I don't know if you want to say being a professional artist or just being, an artist that where you're creating the work you intend, is to listen to that. It's almost like, for me, I feel like it's a little bell that goes off, like ding, it's done. Like an oven timer. I don't know. Just
Awesome.
but you've hit it. You feel it, you know it. there are moments where we, especially if you're in the process of learning, where you will second guess that in yourself and want validation. Is this done? Is this done? Like, I don't know when to stop, and or we tend to can overwork things or something. And one of the best pieces of advice I got from my mom when I was in high school, because she had a lot of artistic talent and dabbled in like drawing, painting, stained glass, wood carving, didn't do it professionally, but could have if she had wanted to. But she said, when you think it's almost done and there's only a couple things you want to change, leave it for 24 hours and don't look at it. And then come back. And if those things still jump out to you, fix them. But she said, you're probably not going to remember what they are most of the time, 90% of the time. And she was spot on. So I do that because back in my student days, and I mean, you're student for life, right? But back in the days when I was like just miles and miles of canvas, I would tend to overwork things. But I loved the brevity of brushwork that I would see in like Richard's work or different people's work. And what I loved about that was not just the technical aspect, but to me, that was indicative of how I saw nature. When you see someone and they turn and you see the light hit their face, and it's like this moment, your peripheral vision kind of blurs everything, and it's just you zero in and your eye almost sees it like a loose alla prima painting. And so my goal is not to paint a certain style, but to paint how as closely and accurately and authentically to how I'm intaking the world and how I'm visually inspired by the world. And so that lends itself, to that. But I think, going back to his question, I think one of the things I didn't mention that's very important at that stage, so you're very mindful about your painting, is to really have an intention of what you want to capture, right? It's at that point you kind of let the photograph go or your reference go. You might, maybe your life reference, if you got a chance to do a sketch from life, might serve you better. But it's almost like your memory of being around that person, or, just little expressions. And you're, yes, pushing and playing with edges, softening, hardening edges, things like that, pushing and pulling little shapes, very small increments. But it's not to copy your reference, because that will just continue to be stiff or get it more detailed, which doesn't necessarily get the expression. And to me, getting the expression or that kind of, it's in the intangible thing, the spirit of someone, right? Getting it to feel like they're in the room with you. You can't just kind of be focusing on the technical, and you can't be rushed. It's like, you have to really slow down, and you have to think, what is it that I'm after? Like, for example, with Richard, he had, an intelligence and a wit about him that was very indicative to him, right? It's intelligent, but then a little smile, a little smirk, a little like that kind of little bit of carefree. Painting was very serious to him, but he enjoyed life almost in the way, like, to me, a kid, both him and Nancy would become like kids with incredible skills in front of these, models. And I mean that in the mindset, what we talked about earlier, that mindset of wonder and fascination, like childhood recovered at will. He and his wife, Nancy Guzik, other amazing artists, just really embody that. And so I knew when it was like, it looks like him, but what I want to get is that wit and that intelligent, the little, nuance in his eye and mouth and smile. And then you start playing with the shapes, because if you start playing with the shapes without having the intention, then you're just kind of chasing form.
Yeah, yeah. And it's there, isn't it? The twinkle in the eye, the little smirk. It's just, yeah. Yeah, it's there in that painting. I've got it pulled up on the screen here next to me. And I just want to say, like, this is what really excites me about the podcast and having this opportunity to speak with you and other amazing artists is, I really feel like I personally, I learned so much. You just hit something that it's been something that I've struggled with for many, many years with my own work. And it's like when you get to that point where it's not quite there, but my tendency was to drill down into the technical, focus on technique, and then focus on detail. And consequently, like if there was a line as when something would start getting overworked, like I'm taking a flying leap over that line and I'm out there into dangerous territory. Every single thing starts getting detailed. And then I step back and I'm like, ah. But the funny thing is, when I go back to my initial compositional studies, my little sketches, even graphite stuff, I'm like, this sketch has it. It's so loose. It's so, suggestive. But then the final painting, something got lost along the way. And that's happened a bunch. And so this is a great reminder for me, and I hope for other people listening as well, to really have that intention first and foremost, and check in with the thing you're really going for. Because technique's important for sure. You got to know what you're doing, but
Oh, yeah.
it's not all about just the fancy tricks and the detail and piling it on, is it?
Yeah, and I mean, I love all that stuff. I love all the technical, the viscosity of paint and,
Mm.
palette knife versus, wash and how it, plays upon the canvas and all of that. I'm like such a geek when it comes to like art technique. But that can't override the emotive story that you're trying to convey. Or if that doesn't point to that, right? It's like then you're just getting lost in technique. And there's that saying in writing. I have a friend that's, professional writer, where it's like sometimes you have to kill your darlings because it doesn't go with the story, or there's things an editor has to edit out of a movie because it might be a great scene, but it interrupts the flow of, the focus of the scene. And those are really, really hard moments when you have to let something go that you feel like you've done, that's like you're just juicy technical stuff you love. It helped when I was growing up that my mother was very artistically minded. I would, like, when I was in college, I would get her to watch like Richard Schmidt videos with me, and I could talk shop with her before I had friends that could talk shop about stuff. My dad was an engineer. And so if I showed a painting, my mom would be like, yeah, this brushwork, this color harmony. My dad might just come in and go, well, that expression looks strange, because, he's coming from a point as a layman, like not an artist. And that's a huge part of our audience too. And I think like the goal for me has always been to like um paint something that shows that beauty of that person or that moment in time, whether it's landscape or person or, animal or something that you're painting. And it just shows off who they are,
Mm.
but then it also shows off how you're seeing them. And that's where the technical comes into me, how you're seeing it. But to me, I always kind of want, I mean, who doesn't want our other artists to like be dazzled by the technique of your work? We want that because that helps us know we're growing and we're, doing competent work. But I never want it to overpower that, the moment, the emotive aspect. And going back to the painting of Richard, there were a lot of techniques I played with that were new. I always try to push myself to do new techniques. You practice every time I do a painting, I try to practice something I'm currently working on and do something I've never done before, and it could be a
Oh,
little thing
wow.
that maybe no one else notices, even in a life study, and then you can implement that into your studio painting just to kind of keep myself from becoming stagnant or too reliant on certain methodology. I feel like the greatest the only formula I use with painting is paying attention to life, and trying to do that with as much, conscientious, authentic intensity as I can, and then figure out techniques to express that. But
Mhm.
so one, really great moment I had when someone viewed that painting, because sometimes as artists, we never get to see the person like really ingest the painting or have the reaction to it. And I usually kind of shy away from that at like my own shows. I hate standing in front of my work, like talking about, unless it's with another artist, or something.
Mm.
But it was it was a finalist at Portrait Society, and there's a time where you're supposed to go in the room, you're supposed to stand next to your painting. And I was like out in the hallway, kind of like being like, oh, I feel like when I do the painting, it's not about the ego. It's not about me. It's about kind of opening that door to spirit. And so it's like, I don't want to make it about me. Sometimes I'll forget to even sign my paintings. My galleries get off after me about that. But there was a man looking at the painting of Richard, and he was standing there for a long time. And he was really like, strong, tall, looked like a football player kind of guy, real masculine guy. And then he turns to me and he goes, "You're the artist, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes, like a little bit of watering in his eyes. And he said, "Richard has been my greatest teacher." He said, "I've never met him, but I've just, of course, like everyone, studied alla prima, his words ring out to me every time I paint. He said, he is my hero. And everyone wants to meet their hero. And he said, I know at this point, I'll probably never meet him in person because he wasn't doing like public appearances. And he looked at me and he's tearing up and he said, looking at your painting, I feel like I've met my hero. And that just makes me want to tear up just recalling that. And I'm like, that is why I paint and want to paint people, because I know it was an immense privilege to get to spend so much time with Richard one-on-one. I want everyone to have a feel of that experience of what it's like to be with him. And if in some very small way, I can capture a little bit of that or give them that experience through a painting done with intention for that experience, that's like, that's it. That means more to me than any award or anything like that, you know?
Yeah.
That's the reason we do it. Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful, Michelle, to hear about that connection that you've had with Richard. I mean, he was such an incredible artist, and again, you know, I admire his work greatly. And you know, he's one of those guys that I look at and I kind of scratch my head, just going, how? You know, I do tend to focus on those technical things and pour over that side of things, but there is a beautiful emotional quality that comes through his work. But also, I mean, I just loved hearing that about the emotional quality in your painting and having that effect on that gentleman. That's really special.
I think before I met Richard, I was really focused on just the technical stuff as well. Like, I love the technical stuff. And I think, you know, one of the interesting things about, to me, the artistic journey, and this is pretty similar to most artists, I think, that I've talked to, is there's something in us when we're young that we want to create. We want to, you know, do a drawing of a person or do a drawing of an animal or something. And then we know we don't have the skills. So we go to art school or we figure out how to learn or we study from books. And we get so caught up in the technical that we get out of art school. I know I was kind of like, what do I do now? I'd kind of lost track with why I wanted to do it. And that's where I think it has to go back into the why, what really personally moves you as an artist. And to me, when I went out to study with Richard, when, you know, he saw a painting of mine, that was the first painting that ever of mine that got into Portrait Society as a finalist. And he called me up on the phone, and I'd met him before, like at a book signing, random, but you know, I didn't expect him to remember me. And this was back in like 2009 or early 2010. And he called me to recognize his voice, and he invited me to come up and paint with him and express that he really, you know, loved this painting. And I was so thrilled. And I thought, gosh, you know, I just want to learn all this technical stuff. And sure, he did impart some technical stuff, but what I learned was not what I was expecting to learn. The most significant thing I learned from Richard and Nancy, his wife as well, is that beauty of not trying to just create a great painting or being attached to the end product. That beauty of immersing yourself in the moment, painting another human being from life, finding out about their story, connecting with them. Yeah, that emotional quality, which was not something I knew I wanted it in my finished work. But at that time, I mostly painted from life where the model's silent. You know, you're in a class, you're just doing shape and form and, you know, that kind of thing. And Richard and Nancy talk to the model more than anyone I'd ever met. You know, they'll talk while they're painting, and he's not concerned with getting an exact representation. And that presence of mind, that kind of joy of connecting with another person, it shows up in the work in a way that's just almost indescribable. And I think too, as I've learned, when you're in that and you're really in that appreciative state of being in the moment and you have that intention to capture something of what you're experiencing of this person, you're not worried about what anyone's going to think of the painting. Your ego's not in it, basically. You're really in a spiritual place, kind of connecting. All the knowledge that you've accumulated comes out, and you do things that you're like, you don't second guess yourself as much because you don't have time to second guess yourself because you're not in your ego, right? You're just focused on the other person. So it's just like this natural outpouring that happens. And sure, you're using like all your mental faculties and your knowledge of technique, but it's like, it doesn't supersede the moment. And, I remember when Richard, painted my portrait, and, there's a video on that, and he did, like, everybody loves that. Like, he did this palette around me that I'm like immersed, kind of coming out of this palette. And I thought it's almost like very symbolic being a painter. And so during the break, he and, myself and Nancy Guzik and some other people that were there gathered around, and we're like, wow, this is really interesting. And he's like, well, I'm just painting what I'm seeing. Nancy had her palette on a back wall, and you could see the white, reds, yellows, and then I was wearing green, and then there was a blue cloth on the chair
Mhm.
behind me. And so it naturally created my palette. And he left it really loose in the shoulder and everything. And I was like, I love how you left this loose here. And he goes, I said, were you just purposely doing that to kind of bring the focal point over here? And he goes, well, that's how your shoulder looks when I'm looking at your face. Like, he said, I'm painting what I'm seeing.
Wow. How interesting.
So it was just kind of fascinating that. And we were, he had, like, he was talking to me while I was posing. He didn't want me to sit perfectly still. Like, um, sometimes if he was doing my mouth, he'd have me sit still, but it was this whole experience of this moment. And I felt like he really captured, me and my presence while I'm painting, which is very serious. A lot of people said, like, oh, well, you always are smiling, but he knew me as the painter. That's, we're serious when we paint together. Um,
That's awesome. Oh, how wonderful. There's another artist from reading your bio. There's somebody else that really stuck out to me, somebody that I've admired for years and years, and that's Jeremy Lipking.
mm,
And I've got a question here from Agatha, and she wants to know specifically what did you learn from Lipking? What was the most important thing that you received from his teaching? And I understand that you're
that's a
good
good
friends
question.
with Jeremy now, and so describe that to me. Like, how did you first meet Jeremy Lipking, and what were some of the things that you got from him?
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy and his wife Danielle, really good friends. They're like
Mm,
family. Jeremy's like a brother, and so I first met them back in 2001, I think it was.
mm,
So I had just seen like a little painting that, is before he was like Jeremy looking. I'd seen a little painting in a magazine that looked very Zorn-like, and saw that this guy was teaching a workshop. I didn't know how old he was. I didn't know anything about him. He hadn't done his big shows. This was really early on, but he was teaching in Arizona, and it was like a weekend workshop, I think for like $99 or something like that, like 2 days. And then he was teaching a week-long workshop in New Mexico that was more expensive. I was like, well, I'm going to go to this little one. And if he's, really great teacher, I'll take this other, workshop. And he was, fantastic teacher and person. And we just hit it off because I didn't know we were around the same age. And so me and him and his wife, we just became fast friends. Glenn Dean was also in that class with
awesome.
Jeremy. And so we all became friends and hung out and, went out to dinner and talk shop and to the wee hours of the morning. And then when I was in New Mexico and in Taos, took this week-long workshop with him painting the figure. Um, I got to know them even better. And I brought a painting for him to critique. And I remember he stared at the painting for quite a long time, which made me really nervous, and he wasn't saying anything. And Danielle leaned over to me and she goes, that's a really good sign. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I don't have anything that I would change on it. It's, really nice. And they actually bought the painting
Oh, wow.
for their collection. And
Wow.
he told me, they both advised me that it was time for me to be in galleries, and I just didn't feel ready. I was like classic overachiever perfectionist, which I'm still an overachiever, but I've replaced the quest for excellence with, let go of perfection, or try to let go of it. And they took that painting and he showed it to his gallery in Beverly Hills. The gallery called me up and invited me to participate in a group show. And that was my first gallery. And then pretty soon after that, I moved out to California just because he was there. He wasn't teaching really at the time. He had just done this one workshop, and just hung out and spent time painting with him, and then met other artists in the area. And then we all became friends and would hang out painting. And this was pre-social media, but it was like just great times of like, you know, hanging out, having dinner, painting a model from life, talking shop until 2 or 3 in the morning over some beers, and just really, connecting. And there was a group of us, maybe about 13 of us, that all gathered together and did that. And but Jeremy and I have stayed really good friends. And one of the things that we're actually teaching a workshop together in Africa in a couple months. And but one of the things that I learned the most from him, he's very generous with his knowledge. He has no secrets. And so I kind of learned about teaching as well from him. Like there's no, just to share anything and everything, because the more great art that's out there, the better. And just so very generous. And so is Richard like that. And I try to be as well. That I learned from him, I'm trying to think how the best way to put this. The biggest thing I learned, which I really needed at that time, was when he would paint from life, he wasn't worried about the kind of, that messy stage of the painting in between, like leaving certain things. He didn't care what people thought. He was just like putting down the necessary elements in a painting to then build upon that foundation and build it up to the place he wanted. And I think one of the things, because I'm a huge advocate of painting from life, right? And I've done it a ton and try to do it as much as possible. One of the things that will trip artists up painting from life is if they're trying to explore a new technique and go out of their comfort zone, and they start worrying about, like, well, what is someone going to think? It doesn't look good. Let me fix it. Let me fix it in case someone comes around and looks at it. Right. And again, that's ego. And I feel like ego has no place in becoming a great artist. It will only trip you up. And Jeremy would do something and it would look really odd in an area and leave it. And he would just leave it until he was ready to fix it. And you could actually, I remember kind of, being in a workshop, and there were several people, like a group of 12 people watching him, and you could see people getting antsy. And finally, one guy said, "When are you going to fix this part?" And Jeremy's like, "It's not time to fix that. If I fix that now, I'm going to have to fix it again later. I need to get this area and this value and this color harmony, and then I can go back and know exactly how to pull that together." And when he
Wow.
said that, I was like, that was fascinating to me.
Hmm.
You're just completely letting go of, what it looks like with the process of getting to where you want to be, and not worrying about what people think. And
Yeah.
that's huge. And I think if, any artist that's struggling painting from life, if they could just do that, focus on that and not work. Because, I teach a lot of classes like you do, and going around the room, a lot of times people are nervous, and it's just, if you just focus on what you're doing and don't worry about what someone else is doing, because they're not worried about what you're doing, they're worried about what they're doing, and just learn and kind of grow and encourage one another, and just take the necessary time with a painting that it needs. Um, that's so important. That's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the trick, isn't it? Getting out of your head, worrying about what's in somebody else's head. And that's something that I still to this day struggle with. From time to time, I slip up. Yeah, yeah. It's like, does this look weird? Shall I fix this?
Yeah. I had a moment this morning where I'm like, do I put this up on my easel? Because that's what's on my easel now, right? It's authentic. But there are things I'm still working on. I still want to push the feathers of the bird back. I still want to, like, play around with some things. But I do know someone asked a question about sizes of paintings. And so it's the large painting that I had in my studio. And I thought, it's okay. It's in process. It doesn't need to be
Oh, I'm
perfect.
so glad you've included it because it's beautiful as well. Let's go back to that painting, the
Sure.
Royal Falconer. So I'm really curious. Okay, so you're gonna push and pull those feathers a little bit. To me, it looks finished. Mind you, we're talking on Zoom here, so I'm just seeing
Yeah.
the Zoom view, and I'm not there in your studio, but it looks fabulous. So
Thank
let
you.
let's go into use this opportunity to go into a few technical things. But first up,
Sure.
I'd love to know. Okay, what else have you got to go on this painting? And are you still waiting for that moment that we talked about before? That magical moment where Stephanie arrives and there she is.
Yeah, it's funny. So I feel like I have the moment here. and a
Okay.
little bit her expression of her smile, which I know is hard to see because it's at an angle.
Yeah.
I feel like there's still some edge manipulation with, like I said, the back of the feathers, maybe a little bit in her neck, maybe a little bit in her sleeve. I'm pretty happy with, the fabric. It's actually very loose, but it has like a
Mhm.
velvet tunic that had some designs. I was going to do the background complete, like the photograph was completely dark, right? Because she was just illuminated by a spotlight indoors.
Mhm.
I was really kind of studying Rembrandt paintings around the time, and kind of wanted to do something emulating kind of that lighting. So this was just the initial wash that I put
Mhm.
in back here in the background. But I really liked it. I liked that it added texture back there. I liked that you couldn't really tell what it was. It added some movement, some rhythmical element. So I decided to keep that. So if I turn that dark, I could easily have her kind of just emerging from the light. So I think leaving that, and I kind of have let it dry now because I do want to play around with some glazing with some walnut oil. I don't think I'm going to do the background dark because I do like that. I like how it kind of flows in and kind of ties in a little bit with her hair, and there's this harmony of the color that rhythmically goes down to the talons of the hawk and such. Um, but I want to try glazing some of the feathers back and see if that will create that turn of form. And if you glaze with walnut oil after it's dry, if I don't like it, it can completely wipe it off and get back to the original painting underneath. So it's just at a little bit of an experimental phase because I did change that a little bit. And there could have easily been light hitting back there. It's just not in my reference. So that's what I'm going to play around with. And
Hmm.
yeah, just
That's
maybe some of the I've never painted armor before. And I still like I'm 90% happy with it, and I still want to play with it, but it's like I did leave it aside for a while. And because a lot of people said, "Oh, it's done, don't touch it," um, that had seen it. And but there's still some little tweaks. And it's probably like no one else would notice them but me.
hmm.
But I want a painting to read from like 10 feet away and feel like the person's sitting there. But then I want to be able to get up close and like, have fun with the technique. And so there's
Absolutely.
just a little couple places where I want to push and pull some edges, I guess.
So you mentioned something there, Michelle, about the reference material being dark for Stephanie, working on
Yeah.
that. And I know you did a bunch from Life too, but I
Yeah.
got a great question here from Cove Arts over on the Academy. Do you make any alterations to the photograph or in Photoshop, like increasing your contrast, saturation, that sort of stuff? Do you manipulate it at all?
Like before I paint my photo
Yeah,
reference.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't honestly really change like contrast, color saturation post edit. I do that in the painting because even like, I have a great camera. I try to shoot mostly in natural light. This was a spotlight in her basement studio that she had, but it was a really nice one. So it had, a big range of color. But, you know, a camera is a great tool.
Mhm.
But if you're using the correct lens, correct focal length, distance from the subject, it will give you accurate drawing, but makes everything overly contrasted. It dilutes the color. When you paint from life, you can really see if you take a photograph of the model and you look at your painting, such a huge difference. It pushes the contrast, it desaturates the color in the lights, in the shadows, especially in the halftones where the greatest areas of color exist. And so I will make those changes, but not try to manipulate the photograph. I'll make those changes in the painting. And that's why I find like I've painted Stephanie from life before, not in this exact pose and exact lighting, but I always try to paint someone from life before I paint them from a photograph, just because, or study them intensely from life, even if I can't paint them. But even if it's just like a 10-minute painting to get some color notes down, where there's no form, no features, but just color notations and value notations, I can then use that coupled with the photograph to then create the painting, because there are things you're going to want to change to make it. I'm not interested in making something that looks like a photograph. I am interested in making something that looks like real life in front of me. And real
Mhm.
life, you have so much vibrancy. You never have black shadows, like pure black shadows. Um, there's transparency in the shadows. There's whispers of color in the shadows. There's also, um, you know, around the highlight, there's like illuminations of color notation that create that glow and create that three-dimensionality and that atmospheric sense of, a portrait, or I'm sure just anything that you're painting.
Hmm. It's yeah, and this is something I find particularly with you mentioned shadows. Anytime I've tried to use black for communicating that, I don't know,
Mhm.
have you? I like the way you put the whispers of color. I try to
Mm.
mix my black so you can get a little whisper of something else in there and push it and pull. And
Yeah, I
sometimes
do
when you're
too.
photographing something, that in particular, like your shadows, for me, maybe just because I shoot pretty dark, the shadows just drop away to nothing. You're not getting any information back out, and there's a
Yeah.
tendency to go, "Well, I'll just mix up a bunch of black."
Yeah,
There we go.
exactly. And
But
that doesn't
you
look
want a
like
little
nature.
something more to come through, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like there's no pure black or pure white in nature, right? Everything's affected by light and color.
Mhm.
And, of course, I don't usually put black out on my palette. Sometimes I do when I'm doing outdoor painting because you can mix it with yellows and get beautiful greens,
Mhm.
or gray down colors really beautifully with like an ivory black. Sometimes that works even better to create luminosity in a landscape than using a color complement, right? If you want that kind of uh, I'd see that in Howard Terbine's work or some of the great cowboy artists. They'd use the black to kind of dull it down just a little bit. But I don't use it in like the face at all, like black
Mhm.
out of the tube. I always mix my blacks with
Mhm.
like a transparent oxide red and ultramarine blue usually. And I try not to even over mix it because I want to get little striations of color. And you can do a shadow with any transparent colors, I feel like, because then that transparency will have those little notations of
Mhm.
color and give you a feeling like you could look back and see something in the shadow, but you can't quite make it out, which is how it is in real life.
Mm.
Um, but just, one quick thing, I guess, to finish answering his question about the photograph. One thing I do manipulate with photographs, you mentioned shooting dark, and we do sometimes have to shoot for the lights and shoot for the darks. And so I might shoot a lighter photograph or a darker photograph and use the two. It's I think it would take hours to try to like get those combined perfectly to paint from, and I'd still want to change things in the painting. So I might just shoot those differently and look at one when I'm looking at the lights, one when I'm looking at the darks. But one thing I really do often is when I'm painting someone like, for example, Stephanie, I knew I was hitting on something with the lighting and the pose, and I'm just having her move. And I just say, move slowly, just interact with the hawk, do whatever feels natural, pretend I'm not here. Right.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to shoot pictures. And so she's kind of moving at half speed. And so I'll just situate myself in a certain place and then shoot tons of pictures from that vantage point,
Mhm.
right? And so I can take the head from one, the hands from another, the movement of the hawk from another, and combine those to create a composite in Photoshop where the lighting is the same. As long as you're not moving, the mistake, I'd see some artists make, because sometimes I'll teach this, like have them do a photo session with a model to kind of guide them through this process after when I teach a workshop, is they'll kind of shift like this. And that's natural to kind of want to get a different angle. But if you hit something you like, it could be the face or the hands or some play of light, I might say, just keep your face like that, but try moving your hands differently. Try
Mhm.
playing with the hawk differently. And then I can't move. I need to shoot those pictures. Then I can take and circle and splice those together to create my own composition. And I do that most of the time when I'm
Mhm.
creating a painting. I hardly ever I mean, it's like maybe 5% of the time you get a photograph that you're like, this is just beautiful, and I'm going to paint this photograph. But to create my vision that I had or my experience, I usually have to take a culmination. I work for maybe 3 to 5 different photographs.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, it makes sense, right? Because you'll have one thing that's present in something, and then something will show up in something else. I end up putting together quite a lot of composites, whether it's a landscape or a portrait across
Yeah.
a wide range of material, because you're gonna hit these points across a multitude of images. And I've said in my teaching as well that rarely will I find one thing that will be the anchor for the painting. Rarely will I
Exactly.
find one photograph, I should say, that will be the anchor. I would love
Yeah, and it's
Michelle.
not advocating changing nature, right? You're not changing nature. but it's just like, I think the picture where her head was like this, the
Mhm.
hawk put its head down, you know? And so
Yep,
there
yep,
was another
yep.
picture where she's looking at me, which I was really tempted to paint, and I might do a smaller version of that because
Mhm.
it was really, she's intently looking like just like such a badass, you know? It just would be great to paint. But and I took the hawk from that one to create this one, but I really wanted for the life-size portrait to kind of paint her looking up and kind of
Yeah.
exemplifying her faith. Yeah.
It's awesome. The pose is perfect. And I just yeah, it's a beautiful painting. And look, if this isn't finished, I'm excited to see what it's going to look like finished. So I'll be checking your website with interest. I would love to dive a bit more into the technicals. You mentioned before walnut oil, something that I haven't got any experience working with. I do have a bottle here in the studio, but I've got a great question here from Sheila. What painting medium do you use, if any? So we already know you use a bit of walnut oil, but I would like to hear, your process because you work a lot a la prima. What is your
Yeah.
process for building up the painting? What are you mixing? Run me through those first stages, and then to Sheila's question, let me ask you about your mediums.
Yeah, so really the only medium I use is walnut oil. I will use a walnut alkyd if I'm traveling. Like when I go to, Africa in a couple months, I'm going to take the alkyd because then it will set up and dry pretty quickly. If I can, I try not to even paint with medium. I might use a little Gamsol for the initial wash. I tend to be allergic to some of these things, like back in the day using, terpenoid or different, any kind of paint thinners. I just was getting a sore throat. Like I almost thought I wasn't going to be able to do regular oils at 24 because like any of the solvents made me sick. Gamsol, when they came out with that, and all the technical information that it has like less toxins per parts per million in the air, stuff. I don't know how to measure that, but they had all the measurements.
Mhm.
It doesn't affect me. So like that, I will initially do a wash, like the wash back here
Mhm.
is done with Gamsol and colors just to keep it thin. It also on the canvas I use, it sets up really quickly, like in about 20 or 30 minutes, those initial Gamsol washes. And then I can kind of go in and paint. It gives me a little time to blend edges, but then I can go in and paint. And I'd say 80% of my painting, I don't use medium. I like paint straight out of the tube. If you're using professional grade paint, it has very little filler. It's good quality. And I use several different brands of paint because sometimes I like it, more buttery or, stiffer paint for different colors.
Mhm.
Um, then I just prefer to not use medium. And walnut oil, I'll generally use on a larger painting when you get into kind of those finishing touches of the face, right?
Mhm.
And you're needing to lay over certain areas over existing paint.
Mhm.
Um, you can't use paint thinner, it'll pick up the paint, but using like a very soft brush, like a mongoose brush or a synthetic mongoose or a sable, and you maybe like a long flat and some walnut oil, you can just glide that. It's like trying to, ice a cake, right? If you have that oil, like having, the knife wet, it glides the frosting right on top without disturbing what's underneath.
Mhm.
The first time I ever baked a cake, I just grabbed the knife, did it, didn't know to put it under hot water, and all the cake came off. And, the first time I tried to do that on a painting, it like made a hole in the existing paint. So there is that process, that knowing how like the technical qualities and the chemical qualities work to lay things on top of each other. So that's really like the area I use walnut oil. When I travel for quick studies, I'll take the walnut alkyd, which, I just got in like a swag bag at a conference, but I really liked it. And I thought it was regular walnut oil because it almost looks the same. And then my painting was dry the next day. I was like, oh, um, but that's kind of fun and can actually, I found, be used in lieu of paint thinner because sometimes when you travel to different countries, they don't have Gamsol. And some of the stuff that they do have is really toxic. And I just don't want to wash my brushes in it or, be smelling that because I'll just get really loopy. Like I've had a couple glasses of wine and I never have a couple glasses of wine. Just
Right.
it affects me in a way. The paint thinner. And I think you said the same thing on the one with Stephanie, is that you are affected by paint thinners.
Some thinners, currently I use a liquid a whole bunch, just because I find it so convenient, and it for my particular technique of layering and layering and layering, I rely on that speed of drying to then build up the complexity of the image.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things is laying down a little bit of texture with some bristle brushes, and then going back over that, and then with the gaps between the brush strokes, you start to reveal this complexity It's really only visible when you
Mhm.
step up close. It's like you put together this thing with thread in a way. I don't know how to describe it, but
No,
that's
I think I totally get what you're meaning. I haven't seen your
yeah.
paintings in person, which I'd love to, but, one of these days. But I tend to do the same thing, and I do it, I guess, because, I didn't use a lot of different mediums because,
Mm,
like, some of those, when people bring them into my class, I just get sick. I just,
yeah,
like, it to
yeah,
the point of being dizzy and almost falling
yeah.
down. It just affects me so strongly. But I do it based on the variation of brushes I use. Like
Mm,
using thin brushes, thick brushes, hog hair versus, synthetics or bristles to be able to lay it down. And sometimes, depending on like the thinness of the paint versus the thicker, some tubes are like I like, a stiffer quality or a less oily paint. And for some of my darks, I like the paints to be like the real buttery and more oily. You can kind of layer that and get that effect
mm.
without using a medium based on the brushes you're using and the surface you're using. That said, though, I did really love your copy you did of the two lions, that
Oh
video
yeah,
you
yeah.
did.
Arthur
That was just
Wardles, yeah.
beautiful. And
Thank
I
you.
actually, after seeing that, I bought some of that, I forget what it's called. It's a liquid, but it's like a tube, like a thicker liquid.
Liquid impasto. Yep,
In
yep.
Impasto, I bought some to experiment with it. So I haven't
Yeah.
used it.
That was a fun painting, and yeah, but the materials that I was using were not what Arthur Wardle would have been using.
Yeah,
He would have had a process very similar to yours, I imagine. And when I was studying that painting up close, and fortunately got to see the original in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, at the American Wildlife Museum.
I love that museum.
Amazing. The original is amazing. I remember that painting just being so arresting, just standing there in front of it, just going, wow, how? Like it just had that, talk about emotional quality for a
Yeah.
wildlife painting. It just had that emotional quality. And so it's long since been my favorite. So about 10, 15 years later, I decided, oh, I'm going to do a master copy of this one. I found a
You
great
did a
image
stellar
online.
job on that.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's hanging in the house now. I won't part with it, but I
I
just
was gonna say, I'm like, it's not for sale.
I don't know. I also don't know legally if I can sell it because I think I'm sure you can as a master copy because it can't be the same
Yeah, I
size. You
don't
have
think
to
you could put it in a gallery, but if another artist wants to buy it,
we'll work something out,
try to,
Michelle.
just let me know. I
But it was
have a big affinity for lions too, so.
It's yeah, absolutely. By the way, I'm excited to see what the results of your African trip is going to be. That's going to be cool. That's going to be cool.
Yeah, I really fell in love with it. I, went for the first time to teach a workshop. I was contacted by a local artist that lives there, and she decided to start a company doing workshops and bringing artists there because she has three kids in high school and she can't travel to the States often. She's like, I really want to take a workshop with you, but would you come here if I brought you here and teach a workshop? And we'll do whatever you want to do, go on safari. She's like, I don't know if you're
Wow.
into animals. And I love animals. I wanted to be a wildlife painter when I was younger. And I
Mhm.
just kind of veered into portraits, but I've always wanted to revisit that. To me, it's like a portrait is a portrait is a portrait, right? Whether it's a lion, whether it's a, person, it's just that same emotion in the eyes and that same, um, similar qualities of how I'm responding to the subject. And so yeah, so I went out there with workshops in SA and didn't know what to expect. It had been like my dream as a little girl to go to Africa, so it was like childhood bucket list dream. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life.
Oh,
It was
wow.
just life changing, and I felt like, I taught a workshop where we went on safari, and then I went with a friend up to Kruger National Park to celebrate my birthday. And Kruger is like the real wild area where National Geographic goes, and you never know what's going to come out, around the corner. And I was just in heaven there. It was like it felt to me like I was in God's garden of creation.
Wow.
And I remember being on safari. There's a painting I'm going to start in the next week, my first painting of this lioness. I also just ordered a big 6-foot canvas that I'm going to do a life-size lion painting, which I'm super excited
Wow.
about.
Wow.
Um, But I remember being at sunset, we're on safari and we saw these 4 lionesses and they were about to go on a hunt. Like we were kind of situated between the zebras and the lionesses, and it looked like the lionesses were looking right at us. I'm like, are we okay? He's like, yeah, we're fine. They're looking at the zebra. They're just ignoring us, and got some tremendous, photos. And I wanted to take my easel out, kind of paint as I was in the Jeep, but I just didn't think that was realistic. But since as I've developed a friendship with this ranger that lives out there, he's like, next time you come, we can do that. You can bring your paints out and I'll take you out. I was like, that would be amazing to paint from life, to try that. Cause he can make sure I don't get eaten. He can make sure that the lions are at a safe distance. But so we saw these lionesses, and then the zebras caught whiff of them and went off in the distance. And the lionesses realized, like right at that moment, they lost their meal. So they just came down and they're kind of plopped themselves around our safari vehicle and just yawning and stretching and licking each other like house cats. And it was right at sunset. And then the sky just turned this beautiful gold, like it looked like gold leaf, right? And you're there and it's like you're in an open air vehicle. I remember when I showed a friend of mine some video, she's like, you had your windows rolled down. I'm like, there are no windows. There's no roof. You're in an open air vehicle. But they see you as one big, you just have to not stand up individually. You just have to stay seated, because then they see you as one big entity, kind of like an elephant, and they won't attack, we're not, they don't see us as on their food chain. So I'm looking at this lioness and she looked directly at me, and it's this moment, right, where you lock eyes with this amazing being, and she's probably 5 feet away from me, just looking at me.
Wow.
And I felt no hostility from her at all. It's a completely wild lioness. I was mesmerized by, she was a young female, so didn't have cubs yet, but adult, and beautiful mane, but scars on her face from, their territorial fights or whatever that they might have with other groups of lions. And there was such a beauty in the juxtaposition of like the scars and then her natural beauty as an animal. And I'm looking at her, and it was this moment when I realized that wildness is not hostility. Wildness is like freedom and possibility. And it just like ignited my soul. And then I remember when the sky turned gold, I looked up at the sky, just like your natural inclination as an artist or human being. And then I looked at the lioness and she was looking up at the sky. And then we looked back again at each other, and I'm like, she's appreciating the sunset at the same moment I am. We're not that different. And it was like a moment I knew I wanted to paint. And thankfully I had, my camera here, and I wasn't even looking through my camera, but I had it situated on them, taking pictures and kind of a little zoomed out so I could just be in the moment and taking some video. And it was just, it felt like how it was intended to be. I can't explain it. It just,
Amazing.
and I can't wait to paint that. And I can't wait to go back.
I can't wait to see that. That's so cool. Man, what I'd give for an opportunity to paint with you in Africa. And so I understand that workshop that you're doing is sold out now, but there's another one in 2024.
Yeah. So this one is coming up in August, which sold out very quickly. I have another one in October that also sold out, that I'm teaching on my own. I'm going back 3 times. That's how much I loved Africa. Wow. And then Jeremy and I were talking about, like, because Africa is so vast, there's so many areas to see. You could keep going back and have new experiences. Every day was a different experience, I've never seen a country with such different landscape. You could drive 20 minutes and the landscape completely changes. One morning we saw lions in the hills, and by the afternoon we were having lunch by the ocean, seeing whales breach the water. It's like, where can you do that? It's just incredible. It reminded me a little bit of the, not in its aesthetics of Alaska, but in the wonderment and wildness, where you can see a bear and you can see a whale jump out of the ocean and you can see, a moose walk by. It's like that same kind of, like, really made me feel like a little kid while I was there. And so another area I've always wanted to visit is because where we're going is South Africa, and Kruger is more north, which is Kenya and the Masai Mara. I've always been fascinated as a little girl when I saw the Maasai people in movies and their rich cultural history. And, very much like I've been fascinated with Native American culture here in the US and just the indigenous cultures and kind of how they've stuck to some of those traditions and how they consider themselves guardians of the land. And so, we are going to go on, safari and sketch animals and paint people in the landscape, sketch wildlife, paint just landscapes. And we're also going to spend a couple days at a Maasai village and hopefully paint some of those people from life,
Awesome.
which I'm so excited to.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, and there is still space in that workshop in April. And we chose April because it's not a
Right.
high tourist season, but it's actually the best time to see wildlife.
Yeah.
And it's their monsoon season, but it doesn't really rain during the day. It's the end of the rainy season. So you get sprinkles at night, but you supposedly get the most gorgeous sunset and sunrise thunderhead clouds
Hmm.
um there, and to see that with wild animals would just be incredible.
Amazing. Oh, look, I can put my name down for 2024. I want to come. I want to come. That sounds so cool. I could talk to you all friggin' day. But I'd be missing a huge opportunity here if I didn't ask you about some business stuff. And I've got some great questions about the art
Sure,
business,
sure.
and that's a
Yeah,
big
your
part of the.
students have fantastic questions.
Well, that's a big part of the podcast too. It's like it's the artist, it's the art, the technical stuff, but
Yeah,
also the business side. Because there's a whole side to making it as a professional artist in this day and age that a lot of people aren't thinking about. I think more and more, it's on the radar, but there's just so much that goes into this, right? And
mhm.
Rowan's got a question here, but he'd be curious. He says, "I'd be curious to hear what types of events, clubs, shows, competitions, etc., that you've participated in over the years that have helped you not only become a better artist, but a better networker, rubbing elbows with other great artists. What does it take to build reputation?" I just thought that was a fantastic question there from Rowan, and because just reflecting on that, just personally, something that I've found is that networking, mingling with other people, whether it's clients, but other artists as well, you never know where that opportunity is going to come from. So making
Yeah,
sure that you're always, you're friendly, you're positive, you're helpful. I try to go out of my way to help other people. It's not a manipulation. I just love people. But what, go take it away, Michelle. I think that's such a fantastic question from Rowan. I'd love to hear about, also some of those strategies that you've had to just be able to make it as a professional. It's tricky today as well, isn't it?
yeah, and it is a really good question. There's a lot to unpack there, and I really like and agree with what you said. I Well, first off, I'll mention, there's so many great resources, competitions, things like that, conferences to go to for artists to get their work seen, learn and meet other people and connect. I like to say connect instead of network, and I'll get into that, the differentiation in a minute. But um, so like Portrait Society, big one.
Mhm.
When I went there for the first time, it's like, wow, it's like your tribe, right? It's all your like-minded people that, you know, geek out about edge work and brushwork and, texture and painting and, talk that you can talk shop with. And I'm very grateful that I had that in California with Jeremy and a group of other artists, out there to where we, could share in that, because art can be very solitary in your studio
Mhm.
sometimes when
Yeah.
you're pushing to learn and grow. And it's just, and I had a lot of time where I would just, prior to going to California, like in my 20s, because I went out there right before I turned 30, but like in my 20s, it was like me just figuring out stuff on my own, and I had a few other mentors that were older than me, but, had families or had different things going on, even if they were professional artists, but not like the kind of young, hungry artist that wants to talk about it all the time.
Mm.
And that's what I recognized in Stephanie and just immediately connected with, and stuff. But yeah, so Portrait Society is a great one. I'd say entering that really like shot my career to a whole new level. Now, I didn't do it for that reason. I was actually very naive to what Portrait Society was. It's kind of like the Academy Awards of portrait painting, on that level. I'm glad I didn't know, because I probably wouldn't have entered, but it was like, I had done this painting, and Jeremy was like, you should enter that in Portrait Society. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. The deadline's coming up. I hadn't entered before, and entered and got finalist. And I was like, of course, really grateful and excited. And at that time, I believe it was Gordon Wetmore, who since passed away, called me on the phone and said, I want to congratulate you on becoming finalist. And I was like, oh, thanks so much. And he's like, no, no, no. You're one of 16 painters out of 4,000 something worldwide that we selected. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. I didn't realize the magnitude of that. I just had no idea, and wasn't really prepared for, what it would do. I mean, I had like galleries all over the US calling me to show my work after that, and, magazines and stuff off of that one painting. And, of course I'd had a career before then, and was like, I was known in California, but this was pre-social media, pre like, the outreach wasn't, you had to like physically get in a magazine. Someone had to physically see it on the newsstand for them to like see your work. Now I feel like it's so much easier for artists. And I think social media, I know, like I have a love-hate relationship with it, because I'm by nature a private person, but at the same time, I feel a calling to share, to help other artists, as a teacher and as an artist. And so I try to be good at it, but I don't post as much as I should, just because it's like, but again, it's a tool. Going back to the, what we talked about, is a great tool that a young artist in another part of the world can post a painting and people will see it from around the world. I mean, that's incredible. And just not something that was available to when I was starting out. And so, yeah, Portrait Society did a lot. And then, getting in, I remember the first magazine I was in, Southwest Art, I think they still do this, the 21 under 31 issue. They would pick 21 artists under 31 years old to feature. And so that was, a big moment as well. And I think there are these great conferences. I just did a demo at the Plein Air Conference, which focuses more on landscape painting. I did a figure in outdoor light for that. These are great things to go to and connect with people and talk shop. I am not, this would be a little controversial, I don't like to network. I don't put a focus on networking or business. I know that sounds weird. I'm not knocking anyone that does, because it is an important aspect, right? We need to make a living at our art so we can continue to do what we love, and continue to make art. But for me, I always just, I guess a good way to put it, my dad, who's an engineer, not an artist, but ever since I was a little girl, he said, whenever you're setting out to do something, because I was always just like overly ambitious on anything I tried to do, whether it's academics or artistic or anything. He said, don't look at the things you need to overcome, but think of the end goal. What do you want the end goal to be? And figure out how to work your way back from there. And that was, I mean, that can be in so many areas in life, right? You just kind of think of, what do I want the end goal to be? And to me, I realized, having had that experience at the Met and seeing those paintings, my goal is for one day for my art to be able to, like my painting, to hang next to those paintings in a museum. And it wouldn't be like the Sesame Street, which one doesn't belong? Like it would look like it belongs there. Yeah. That was always my goal. So to me, I kind of just, really focused on, how do I get there? Well, my painting has to be good enough. So, I took a hard look at my work back in the day in my 20s. And I was like, yeah, I feel like, and I teach this, that every artist has things that come naturally to them. Every artist has areas of weakness that they need to work on. Sometimes we focus so much on what we need to work on, we don't pay attention to the things that come naturally to us. And I think it's very important for us to know that, and so that we can intentionally repeat it and build on that. So for me, for example, drawing always came super easy to me, like drawing, composition, color mixing, those things. Like I could always mix whatever color I wanted. Drawing, I could always, from a young age, was, drawing. And I remember the first drawing I sold was in 7th grade. I was sketching at lunch and some kid came up and gave me his allowance, said, I'll give you my $7 allowance for the week if I can have that drawing, that I'd worked 15 minutes. And it was like, blew me away that someone would do that. So drawing always came easy to me, but edges were like, that was like a battle. That edges and values were really, really hard for me to simplify and focal. So I spent years just focusing on that in my work to bring that up to the level of the other things. And so, I mean, going back to the main question, I always believed so strongly, if my work was good enough, people would notice. And then the whole thing, like galleries, networking, career, finances, all of that would take care of itself if the painting was good enough, right? Because if you don't have the product, you might get by with advertising, but then as soon as there's not quality in the product, that's like a 15-minute of fame kind of thing, right? So to me, it's like, I want my paintings to stand the test of time. I want them to always look better in person. I want people to really be like fascinated with the technique, that it interests their eye, that they feel something, because art's supposed to make us feel something, not just dazzle the eyes. And my hope is that, hundreds of years from now, we'll still have that impact, and I'm not there yet. I want to be there. I hope I get there by the time, day I die. And I mean, I had a moment that was like still surreal to me. That was like kind of like a glimpse of getting close to that dream when I was, a magazine put me in my work in a story about Sargent and Soroya, and then picked a few contemporary artists. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a little inkling of it. But again, to me, it's about the quality of the work, I just want it to stand the test of time. So I believe if your work is good enough, that takes care of itself. And that has been true for me, right? The other thing you do have to do is put your work out there. And that's hard for some people, because sometimes we feel like, I'm not going to put out there till it's perfect. And what does that mean? That's a different definition for everyone. I'd say replace perfection with excellence or authentic, or this is true to my vision at this point in my life, right? It may be different. I could paint the same painting, same subject matter 2 years from now, and it might be very different because I might be different and, will be, more involved in different ways in my thinking. So I think not being afraid to put your work out there. And I really struggled with that when I was younger, because being an overachiever and a perfectionist and being very ambitious, I was never happy with anything I did, because in my mind, it always looked better than what I was able to physically do. I've since made peace with that's just the process of creation. Your vision is always ahead of your ability. And when your ability catches up, your vision jumps, and then you keep going. And that's what keeps us working and inspired.
Or frustrated.
And I think you get frustrated until you make peace with the fact that every single other person that is trying to create goes through that, and it's part of the process. And then, because when you get frustrated, you stop learning. And so if you can keep yourself from getting frustrated and make peace with that's just part of the process, then you can dive into the learning, ask yourself better questions when you're painting, figure that technique to complete and make your vision kind of concrete on canvas. But yeah, so I had this moment that kind of taught me about that when I was like in my mid-20s, and I'd been invited into my first gallery show in a group show in Santa Fe. And I'm finished this painting, but of course just wasn't like, sometimes I'll be happy with one thing. I remember doing a painting of a figure leaning. I'm like, I like the elbow, I'm not happy with the rest of it. Sometimes we're so hard on ourselves. And I'm having tea with a friend of mine, and I'm telling her, like, I don't know, maybe I should do something else. I don't have time. I don't really want to put this in the show. And this older woman was walking by. I think she was, maybe in her 70s or something. And I didn't know her. She just was walking by our table, and she kind of put her hand on the table and made a noise and made us jump. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't deprive people of the blessing of seeing your work." And then she walked out.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
I was like, I remember that to this day. She was like this sage or this angel that came in and just said that, I put the painting in the show and it sold, and, things, and stuff happened in my career from then. And so I think, another thing, just to elaborate on that question, sorry, I thought there is a lot to unpack in that question
Oh,
because it's
yeah.
a simple question, but it's like complex in its
So
nature.
much there.
You touched on something that I really strongly agree with, is it said you're not interested in networking to like manipulate or get anything, but you're interested in connecting with people.
Yes.
That's exactly how I feel. To me, I am fascinated by other people. I want to talk to other people. I want to know their story. I want to understand what makes them tick, or how their mind works, their stories, their emotional components of their stories. I love that. That is like, painting is a byproduct of that, my fascination with humanity in that way, and individualness. And everybody has their, universal story, but there's those individual things that are just fascinating me. And it's like very hard to have a conversation without asking you about all those intricacies about your life and your family life and your painting life too, because I just want to know that about someone. Um, so I think, to me, I would not focus, I would advise, don't focus on networking.
Yeah.
Focusing on networking is focusing on what you can get. And that is a very repellent energy, right? If you can focus on connecting with someone, what can we share and what can I give? That's spiritual. And it's something, it's just in all areas of my life, whether it's teaching art or even just going to the grocery store to, get something. I try to have that intention in my life as a Christian. How can I serve? What can I give? Right. And a lot of times it's like giving your attention, giving a listening ear,
Mhm.
giving. And when you do that, it does come back to you, and people go, well, then how can I give to you? And how can, I serve you? And, but you're not doing it with that intention. You're doing it just as an outpouring. So that's where it's like, I know advertising, networking, that kind of stuff has its place, but I choose not to partake in that, because
Mhm.
I feel that switches me into like, what can I get? And I never want to operate from that intention of what
Yeah.
can I get.
Yeah.
Even, I even coach people on when they're working with a model, taking photographs or painting a model. Sometimes we get so attached to the painting, we start fussing with the model because we're like, I need to get this. I need to get this. Right? That does not produce a good painting. The model gets frustrated. They don't feel respected. You can't imbue the painting with the emotion you want to because you're not getting it from the model. But if you go, wow, this is amazing to paint this human being. This human being is choosing to sit and let me study them and look at them intensely. What a privilege and an honor that is. And we'll never get this moment in time again. And it's just
Yeah.
very sacred in that way. Like, how can I show off the beauty of who they are in my painting? And how can I
Mm.
connect with them so they feel they feel how much I'm appreciating them right now? When you do that, the painting turns out the best because you're not focused on the painting. And that's something that I feel like, I mean, and it doesn't mean you're not focused on like value, shape, edge, and form, right? But it's not like, what can I get out of this session, but what can I give out of this session?
Awesome.
And to me, giving the paint is like, sometimes you might give the painting to the model, or you're giving it to the gallery, or you're giving it, and it's okay to get money for your work. We have to make a living, but you are giving that inspiration in a
Mm.
finished painting.
Mm.
And switching that mindset, to me, that's what I saw in Richard and Nancy, what they do. And it's why they both do such brilliant work, in my opinion. And in turn, it makes the work valuable. And I think if you focus on those things, people will want to talk with you. They'll want to work with you. They'll want to learn from you. They'll want to connect. And then the networking happens without you having to go out and strive for it.
Mm.
I hope that
That's
makes sense.
that landed for me so much. Wow. Absolutely.
And it's hard to do when you're
Yeah.
pinching pennies to like, I mean, there were times in California, I did not come from a wealthy family, right? I have had to earn kind of my way and figure out my career. There were times I was rolling change and deciding whether to buy paint or groceries. Like, well, I can eat noodles, ramen noodles, and get the real cadmium paint. I mean, I had those times. So I don't want someone to think I'm coming from a place of privilege, although I feel like everyone born here, we have more privilege than anywhere else in the world. But um, it's not easy to say, what can I give when you have very little to give? But I think that means even more when it's like, what can I give with what you have? And everyone has something to give. You know, when I met Stephanie Page Thompson, I could give her a scholarship to my workshop. So that's what I chose to do. You know, it's like, we can always give our attention. We can always give our appreciation. You know, anyways, I don't mean to go off, but it's just,
No, it's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Look, as I said, I could talk to you for hours and hours, Michelle, but this has been such a treat. Could you please let people know out there where's the best place to connect with you, see more of your work, and even your social media as well?
yeah. So, you know, my website, Dunaway Fine Art. I do need to update my website. So, again, I'm not that great with the techie stuff. I post most of my stuff on Instagram, which is again at Dunaway Fine Art. I do have a Facebook that's just Michelle Dunaway, where I do post some stuff, but I really post the majority of everything to Instagram, first and foremost. So
Awesome.
that's the best place to see my work. And
Awesome. Oh, Michelle,
it's
this
been
has been
amazing talking with you. I want
oh,
to pick
it's
your brain about so many things as well,
oh, it's
technique
been
and philosophical. Because
we're gonna have to do a part two. It's just a given. We're gonna
you
have to
know,
do a part two.
I'm there. I'm there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the Creative Endeavor podcast.
Thank you. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for all you do and putting these podcasts out there and putting out, you know, online inspiration and teaching, because, you know, the world really needs it. And we became so aware during the pandemic how much that, you know, we needed. But I think that woke us up to a need that was existent before that. It just gave us permission to recognize that need, you know, to connect with other artists around the world. And so I think, you know, bravo to you for doing what you're doing. And I wish you such, you know, joy and inspiration as you do it. So,
Ah, thank you. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavor podcast. A huge shout out and thank you to Michelle for joining me. You can find her on her website at www.dunawayfineart.com and on Instagram at Dunaway Fine Art. Make sure you're following her right now. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you get something out of it? Are you inspired? Are you pumped up like I am? I really hope so. It's my intention to bring you as many of these episodes as possible to really make an impact on you and your career. And I couldn't do this without you. So I really thank you for taking that time to leave me a rating or a review on whatever audio platform you're listening on. Also, let me know what you think of the show, and if you really enjoyed it, then share this with others on your social media. It makes a huge difference to the reach of the show, and I thank you so much for that. All right, I'm going to get out of here and get back to painting. Huge shout out and thank you to Michelle once again. I'll see you in another episode of The Creative Endeavor.